People accumulate ghosts on flights, tourists bring souvenir, families bring suitcases, businessmen bring bad cologne, and sometimes every cabin collects one quiet thing that sits in the same seat on the same flight like a needle in a groove. For me, that thing was seat 23A. I'd been a flight attendant for 6 years when I first noticed him. He never spoke. He never checked his bag. He always wore a dark coat and watched the clouds like a man listening for news. I told myself I loved him the first time I noticed him because you get fond of patterns when you live between airports. On odd routes, short hops, red eyes, international runs, he'd be there, a silent statue with a boarding pass folded like a small prayer. The crew joked about him, our ghost, one of the boys would say, and we'd laugh when the lights dimmed before takeoff. But jokes have teeth. After a while, the jokes became notes in the logbook. Pilots would mention how the instruments fluttered when we passed the 23A seat row. Baggage handlers whispered. His presence became a prediction. The first strange thing was the phone. Flight rules are clear, no phones during taxi, but every time we reach cruising altitude, passenger phones around seat 23A would light up like a flock of moths. But his remained black as a shuttered window. I would walk by in the service aisle and feel a kind of hush settle over my shoulders, like being in a church you'd never been taught to pray in. "You see him?" a nervous new attendant asked me once. "He is armless," I said, but I did not know. Harmless indeed? Is he? He was polite in the way of statues. If an elderly man needed a pillow, he would slide from 23A and hand it over wordlessly. If a child wept, he would put a tiny hand on the child's shoulder, then fold both hands in his lap like a man practiced in patience. He never ate. He never drank. He never asked for anything. What else would a flight attendant ask for, basically? On one flight to Denver, a passenger in 23B, a woman traveling alone, turned in her seat mid-flight and asked me outright, "Who is he?" She whispered, "He is everywhere." I told her a story about a man who loved traveling, a lonely widower with a passport thicker than a hymn book. It felt like the right kind of story. The woman held my hand like a believer and smiled. Then we hit turbulence, not the jitter of a plane passing through a cloud, but a long, rolling bump that shuddered through the wings. The cabin lights flickered. Some people laughed nervously. Others held the seats for dear life. I found myself in the aisle, reaching for the closest cart and thinking about whether this was the moment you become brave. When the plane steadied, the woman in 23B was gone. Her seat was empty, and the blanket folded neatly as if she had only left us to use the restroom. I walked to 23A. He sat there like he always did. The blank space of the woman's seat had become empty of its occupant in a way that felt like a small loss. Not violent so much as an omission. We had a medical diversion. The pilot announced an hour later, like pressing down on a bruise. We landed at a small airport, lights low, and paramedics walked up the aisle. They took seat 23B for examination. When they returned, their faces were flat and polite. They refused to let us open the checklist. Something in their mouths was closed like a safe. That's when I began collecting small anomalies. The in-flight meals served at random rows around 23A would be always cold, as if they'd been set aside days ago. Bin locks by row 23 would jam like they were welded shut. On a flight to Chicago, the oxygen masks above 23A deployed for no reason. No alarms, no sensor, just the little red strap falling out like the hand of an oracle. After months of noticing, a recurring pattern embedded itself in my sleep. I would dream we were landing, and in the dream, the man in 23A would stand up and turn to face me. His mouth would open and no sound would come out. He would point to his passport, and in my palm a boarding pass would appear. I woke sweating and found my fingers sticky as if I'd been handling glue. I thought I was losing it until the day I found the photograph. I never liked cameras, much because they seem to catch the weak spots of a person, but a passenger on a red eye slipped a small camera into my hands, asking if I would take a picture for a friend in 23C. I obliged and walked the camera down the aisle. I pointed and snapped, smiling for the lens, making faces like a professional clown. When I flipped through the images later, casual shots of sleeping people, heads bobbed in mid-snooze, there he was, 23A, framed by the overhead compartments, and in the tiny glossy rectangle of the photo, his eyes were open and he held a small square of paper. My name was written on it in a handwriting I did not recognize. It said, "You are ready." I folded the photo and slid it into my pocket. My teeth felt loose. "You are ready for what?" I asked the empty cabin. A flight attendant can ignore a lot of things. We patch, we hand out blankets, we smile, and then store the smiles in a drawer, but the patterns breed explanations. People want narrative. I began to watch the man closely. I learned the small muscle movements of his jaw. I learned the angle at which he tilted his head when a child reached for a cookie. I learned the way he breathed. Slow, patient, like someone who knew they'd been early to a very long appointment. On a late spring flight to Dublin, the captain asked for a volunteer to help with cabin checks. I walked the aisle with my torch and my training and a sudden sense of purpose. When I reached row 23, the man was asleep, chin on his chest, a small crease at the corner of his mouth. The torchlight skimmed over him and caught on the polished edge of something tucked in his lap. A photograph. Not of him, but of me, taken from behind my shoulder as I passed a counter in the lounge days earlier, checking the flight sheet. In the photograph, my face was turned slightly, and in the reflection of a steel kettle behind me, a figure stood, a man in 23A's coat, smiling. He looked older than I expected. He looked like someone with a job that required patience. I felt my throat close. I sat on the jump seat and opened the photograph more carefully. The image slipped from my fingers. For a single beat, I was sure it would combust. He woke. He always wakes the same way, slow, like someone easing through curtains. He looked at me, and for the first time his mouth moved. "Have you ever lost a passenger?" he asked. "Lost?" I managed. "Yes, things get misplaced. Souls, schedules, people who are tired of moving on." I told him the right thing, that we report, that we search, that we follow protocol. He nodded as if I'd recited a formula. "You will learn," he said. I asked him who he was and why he always sat in 23A. He smiled, that patient smile again. "I am where people leave their last seat," he said. "I gather what is misplaced. I take care until someone comes looking." I did not sleep on the flight home that night. I sat in the galley and let the hum of the engines become a kind of lullaby. I thought of passengers who never wake up from a nap, and of children who fall asleep on their parents' shoulders, and of the way world can quietly rearrange itself. On the next flight, a young man boarded in work clothes, head down, eyes red from crying. He sat in 23A. My training told me to be professional. My body betrayed me. I made small talk. He did not answer. He folded his hands the way the other man had. When we hit cruising altitude, I noticed the tiny edge of a photograph tucked in his lap. The corners were frayed. I opened my mouth, meaning to ask if he needed anything, but he looked at me with eyes that were impossibly old and said, "Thank you." After that, the flights changed subtly. Some people who boarded with a small light in their eyes left with it rekindled. Bags lost for days reappeared by the carousel. A woman who had been certain she'd been pregnant for months received a call mid-flight telling her the test was negative. The cabin crew filled fewer reports. The pilot stopped making offhand jokes about 23A, and then one morning I woke up in my apartment to find a boarding pass on my kitchen table. It was for flight 23A, seat 23A, with my name on it. I laughed because laughter is the reaction of people who are refusing to believe. I taped the pass to the fridge like a silly talisman and went to work. That night, a man in a dark coat boarded my flight. He sat where he always did. I pushed the service cart, arranging cups, smiling, professional. At the bar of my mouth, a question pressed. What does an ordinary person carry that could become so heavy you'd have to sit in one place and gather it like an organ? When the flight was over, when the passengers deplaned into a thin rain, I noticed my hand felt light. I reached into my pocket to pull out my pen and instead found a photograph. It was of the cabin, taken from the jump seat. In the image, I stood in the aisle, mid-stride, carrying the cart. Behind me, in 23A, the man held up a small square of paper. On it, in a hand that looked alarmingly like my own, was written, "Thank you for the passengers." I kept working, I kept walking the aisles, but now when I pass row 23, I move slower. I make a point to fold small blankets into neat little squares and tuck them into arms. I hand out little candies even when I'm exhausted. Sometimes in a quiet minute on the tarmac, I catch myself smiling for reasons I don't want to name, because we are all carrying someone else's quiet things, a grief, a memory, a lost postcard, and there will always be a seat where those things accumulate. Someone or something has to make sure they don't slip through. He never spoke again, but once I tucked a sleeping child into her father's arms. I glanced at 23A and saw him nod. It was not a human gesture exactly. It was more like the world tipping slightly toward order. When I fold safety cards now, I sometimes turn the corner of one into a small square and put it in my pocket. I don't know why. Maybe it is a superstition. Maybe it is a gratitude. Maybe one day I will need it. If you travel often, look for the silent passenger. Seat 23A. Wave to him if you get the chance. He doesn't always wave back, but sometimes, when the engines hum and the sky is a black soft thing outside the window, you might feel a presence sitting beside you, keeping the seat warm. And if you ever find a photograph tucked into your bag, one you didn't take, fold it and carry it with care. Some things are meant to be transported, some things are meant to be kept. They called it an oddity at first. The gate number, the way the board never cleared, how the clock above gate 13 seemed to trail everyone else by 5 minutes. They called it superstition in the bar by the windows. I had a layover long enough to learn the patterns. I'm not proud of what I did. Pride is a luxury I traded for curiosity the night flight 666 refused to depart. It started simple. A delay, a whispered announcement pushed our departure to indefinite. People groaned, babies wailed, the fluorescent lights hummed above, and the tile under my shoes was the kind that remembers every footstep. I found a seat across gate 13 and told myself I'd wait an hour, then go get coffee. You know the tiny calculations a person makes in an airport: time, distance, boredom. I stayed. At first, it was the regular commuters, businessmen in cheap suits, a woman with a stack of travel brochures, two students who laughed like it was a joke. Then the regulars left. The cleaning crew came through and wiped the seats. Then they moved on. A janitor paused and looked at the gate number, frowned, and kept walking without saying a word. The board over the gate blinked. Flight 666 delayed. Delayed. No new time, no new information. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. By 2 in the morning, only a handful of us remained. The announcements had turned hollow. The PA repeated comfort phrases that meant nothing when no gate agent came to explain. A soft, steady mutter arose. Nervous conversation, theories. Someone joked about bad luck. Someone else said Gate 13 had been a thing for years. Flights that never left, passengers who missed flights and were never seen again. I laughed then, I laughed to keep panic at bay. But when I walked the perimeter to stretch my legs, there on the glass next to the exit was a bulletin board jammed with missing posters. They were laminated, the kind the airport prints with official typefaces, the kind that tries to look methodical. Faces, names, dates. Some had been filed years ago, some were from last month. I recognized the face on one poster. It had a cold familiarity I didn't want. The fellow who sat in the second row from me now, the student who had been texting the whole night. I felt ridiculous, a child making associations. Been a while, the student said, leaning back in his chair. He pointed at my shoes. You are the one who sat down and stayed. I slid into the seat across from him. We made a small talk where we were heading, the banalities that thin out of a person into a waiting thing. It felt like the universe was pulling a thread through the terminal and watching me tug. At 3:17, a clerk in a navy blazer passed, holding a crate of water bottles. She didn't look at us. She walked straight to the gate desk and placed the crate down. She dialed something on her phone and listened. Her mouth moved, but no sound came through the air. The rest of us breathed. She looked up at us then, eyes like somebody else's memory. You know about Gate 13? I asked before I could stop myself. She smiled in a way that made my teeth ache. Everyone knows something, she said, but some of you stay long enough to see the other part. I didn't like that sentence. I didn't like how soft her voice was, and I didn't like the way the lights buzzed like insects. The student laughed too loud. He said we should get closer to the gate to see the plane. Maybe it is delayed because they are fixing a glitch. He said it like a person trying to make a problem technical so it could be resolved or solved. When we got close, the gate area seemed to compress. The screens were frozen on the same rows of text. The entry archway to the jet bridge, a skinny tunnel that folds into the belly of the airport, looked darker than the rest of the terminal, like the glass had swallowed the light. The gate agent behind the desk was a silhouette. His name tag read H. Crow. He moved slowly, methodically, stamping manifests into a ledger that never changed. You shouldn't be here, he said. It wasn't a warning, it was just an observation. I opened my mouth, but my voice was a small object that shattered on the tile. The students laughed and then stopped like someone turned their music off abruptly. The others around us, an elderly woman with a rosary, a man with a child's backpack, all froze with the same expression. The exact shape of realizing you are late for something that isn't yours. A passenger from a bench nearby rose and walked toward the jet bridge. Nobody stopped him. He walked with a tiny confident smile and vanished into the darkness. We stood there. The PA announced something, a soft bell chiming that sounded like it was underwater. The board stuttered. A new poster appeared on the wall as if pasted by invisible hands. Another missing person's face. A date. Tonight. The clerk looked at me with that same mild grin and said, They don't always leave right away. They wait a little, like all of you waiting for your lives to be different. I wanted to leave. I told myself I would. The lights hummed like a held breath. I took one step away and my shoe stuck. I tugged and realized the rubber on the sole had a tiny face imprinted in it. I laughed out loud at myself. The student laughed too, because laughter is the currency we spend when we are afraid. At 4 in the morning, I woke on the bench. The terminal had settled into something else entirely. Quieter, as if sound had been removed from a tape. I groaned, stood, and saw the bulletin board again. There was a new missing poster pinned more recently than the others. It had my face. They told me later, the other regulars, the clerk with the water crate, that the clock at gate 13 is honest in its own way. It measures a different kind of time. When you wait there long enough, the gate starts choosing a punctuation for your life. Delay, delay, delayed. Then, finally, boarding. I looked for the student. He was gone. The janitor had left without sweeping. The gate agent's ledger was blank. My boarding pass was still in my pocket, the ink smudged with sweat. On the back of the card, between the barcodes, someone had written in neat black ink, "Thank you for staying." I tried to leave again. The security doors opened. People pushed past, rushing to terminals that hummed with the normal flights. No one looked back. The next morning, I found a photograph in my camera roll I didn't remember taking. It was the gate, from an angle I had never been allowed to see. In the photograph, a group stood at the archway, faces turned inward and smiling at something behind the camera. At the center of that group was me, not sitting, not waiting, but standing like someone who had been given a job. When I went back to gate 13 a week later, the board read, Flight 666. Cancelled. The clock above it hammered by 5 minutes behind the rest of the airport. On the bulletin board, they had added my poster. The clerk smiled and said, "You made your choice. Thank you for staying." I have places to go now. I still tell myself I'll catch the next plane. I still believe you can step away. But, as they say, I have indeed made my choice. And indeed, Gate 13 always thanks me for staying. But when I close my eyes at night, I can hear an announcement read in a hollow voice. Not for me, not yet. But soon, final boarding call for all passengers who have been waiting long enough. And I wait. I always wait because waiting is part of the job now. The carousel looks innocent if you come at it with the right kind of hunger. It curves like a mouth. It spins. People stand around it and reclaim pieces of their lives. Jackets, souvenirs, toothbrushes. I've circled that ring more times than I can count. Airports make you into a collector of things you barely remember hauling across borders. This time I reached for my suitcase and felt something cold under my fingertips. Not the plastic, not the handle, but a layered weight like another person's breath pressed against the shell. I lifted the zipper and pulled. Inside, folded like someone had ironed the creases out of it, was a small stack of photographs. The top one was of the bed in the hotel room I had checked out of 7 hours earlier. I flipped through. The pictures were taken from angles that made no sense. The doorway, the ceiling, the foot of the bed. In each, I was asleep. There's a particular terror to seeing a photograph of a moment you thought had been private. The images were crisp as glass. The timestamp in the lower corner read 3:12. So apparently it was AM. I looked at my watch. It said 3:12. My stomach went cold, but I laughed anyway because laughter is easier than understanding. I shoved the photos back in the suitcase and carried it home like a man carrying a small animal. At home, I spread the photos on the kitchen table, different nights, different rooms, me lying on my back, on my side, curled like someone trying to roll into the middle of a secret. My phone showed messages I hadn't sent, My hair was mussed in one picture exactly as I'd found it the morning I left the hotel. In another, the photograph captured a movement, not me, but a shadow at the foot of the bed, like a person waiting politely in the doorway. I decided to check the hotel bill. The clerk at reception looked at me like someone waking from a trance. "You checked out at 6, sir," she said. "No problems. Do you need copies?" I asked if there were security cameras. She shrugged. "Back hallway, nothing points into rooms. Housekeeping does rounds." She looked past me into the corridor like there was a line of men carrying cameras. I called the airline. They were sympathetic, the voice well rehearsed. "We'll file a claim." I felt my complaint break into smaller pieces as the automated menu chewed it up. The photos were a problem that didn't fit in any form field. I started to search my life like one of those dogs that digs under garden fences, combing through receipts, checking my photos, rewatching the hotel CCTV I wasn't entitled to see. There was no footage of anyone entering my room. Housekeeping logs said a cleaner tidied at 10 a.m. The front desk file had a note: "Room vacant, late checkout, no." Then the third photograph changed everything. In it, I'm halfway between sleep and waking. My hand is on the sheet. My eyes are half open. Behind the lamp on the bedside table, a face is visible in the reflection. A face I know so well I thought I might be making it up. It is my face. Not a stranger with similar features. My face, older perhaps, with lines I hadn't earned yet, staring at me through the glass. The image in the reflection is smiling, not a friendly smile, a smile like a mirror finally answered back. "This is a hotel room of a certain airline. So, airport is close. Maybe time works different way over here." I didn't sleep after that. I began to find the photos in the strangest places, inside the cereal box in the cupboard, tucked into the pages of a paperback. Each time, another scene of me asleep, another timestamp nudging forward in the night. It felt like someone sewing a second life into my day. On the third morning, I noticed my luggage tag had a second name on it in fine print. Not mine, but a variation. Like a middle name I never knew I had. I followed the trail, the tax barcode scanned at a cargo facility I'd never flown through, then at a sorting center where the workers didn't speak a language I understood. The case was moving, but not because I carried it. It was being rotated like a prize, photographed and repackaged. I grew careful. I locked my doors. I unplugged my cameras and burned the photos one by one until the ash on my kitchen counter looked like the remains of a life I'd carefully folded away. I thought that would be enough, but the next morning there was a single glossy print on the windowsill. Me standing in the kitchen, looking out, while something else stood directly behind me. It was me. The background was the carousel. The carousel at the airport is mostly harmless. It repeats. It spins things until the edges blur, and then it gives them back to you. Sometimes the same, sometimes a changed version of what you once knew. I returned to the carousel because returning felt like a right. I wanted to confront this thing that had been moving around my life like a silent hand. I put my case on the belt and waited. Around me, people joked, checked phones, argued about taxis. No one noticed the photo tucked into the front pocket of my suitcase, placed face down between underwear and charger. When the bags came around, I watched them move like planets, heavy, indifferent. And then I saw the man take my photo. He was neither young nor old. He wore a coat with deep pockets and moved with the absolute confidence of someone who had done a job 1,000 times. He stood beside the carousel and took a single picture of the crowd. The camera flashed once, Subtly, like a throat clearing, he folded the photo and slid it into his pocket. I followed him. He took the elevator to exit C, then turned into a service corridor I had never noticed. The corridor smelled of oil and oil vending machines. He reached a door with a small window. He knocked once. The window showed hands, then opened. Inside, the room was lined with photos, not just of me, hundreds of photographs, dozens of suitcases, each tagged and labeled. Rows of watches, passports, stray gloves. The man set his camera down and finally looked at me. "You shouldn't be here, you know," he said. "You took my pictures," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Cracked, surprised, accusing. He smiled. There was something familiar in the curve of his mouth. He withdrew a photograph from his pocket and held it out to me. In the picture I watched, a man stood at the conveyor belt, turning the face of a photograph toward his hand like a ritual. And in the reflection of the photo, in the glossy surface, someone else stood behind him with the exact same camera taking the photo. "This is how it works," he said. "You carry pieces of yourself through places that remember you. We take the parts that would otherwise get lost." "Who are you anyways?" I asked. He touched the rim of the camera. "I'm a sorter," he said. "Someone has to make sure the right reflections find their rightful carrier." I should have run then. I should have grabbed my suitcase and left and never looked back. Instead, I stepped forward and took the printed photo in my hand. It was warm. The man's voice turned soft. "You'll stop waking the wrong way," he said. "You'll stop finding yourself in the background. We'll rotate things. We'll put you where you belong. Rotation is a kind word. The machines take turns, and soon enough you feel like you belong to a rhythm that is not yours. They put the photos in a new suitcases. They label them with names you half remember. They photograph you sleeping because sleeping is the only safe time to reassign someone's life." He offered me coffee. While he poured, I watched a row of photographs move like cards in a hand. A woman asleep on a bench, a child on his father's lap, me in 3 different beds. Each image slid under a scanner. The scanner hummed like a satisfied beast. When I asked if they ever made mistakes, he shrugged. "Mistakes are rare," he said, "and when they happen, we fix them anyways." "Fix them how?" I said, or asked basically. He smiled, that same familiar smile, and fed a photograph into the scanner. The machine ate it whole. For a moment there was a sound like someone exhaling for the first time. The photo lay on the output tray, blank. He handed me the blank. "A life reprinted," he said. "A reflection returned." I left with my suitcase, and for a week I slept like a man who has been given back something. The photos stopped appearing in odd places. The carousel at the airport spun like any other machine. I told myself I had been lucky. On a humid afternoon, months later, I opened my bedside drawer to find a single photograph pressed under the pillowcase. Me, asleep, and in the reflection of the bedside lamp, a man with the same coat I'd seen in the sorting room stood taking a photo of the photo. He smiled as he took it. This is how the world keeps its pieces, and every time you think something private is safe, remember, there is a carousel somewhere, turning slowly, handing back the parts of you that you thought were yours.